So we're going to talk a little bit about financing in veterinary school. This is going to be all pretty surface level since none of us are financial experts, but we just thought some of this information would be good for you guys to get a little introduction on what it's like financing for vet school and what your options are. Okay. Yeah. Again, just a disclaimer, we're not financial experts, so we might not be able to answer all your questions. All right. The first thing is first, the cost of attendance. That's something you're going to want to find out, and it's information that's available to everybody. So just for some averages, the median resident tuition. So for example, if you're a California resident, the median tuition would be 32,647, and the median non-resident tuition is about 53,556. So there's some differences here, just because. Public schools, it's similar to the public university system. And cost of attendance is different at each individual institution, just like salaries are different in every state, so is tuition. Yes, this is per year. And this is just tuition. But you can visit these following resources for specific information about the cost of attendance at your vet school of interest. So I'm going to go through these a little more in detail, but there's the AAVMC cost comparison tool, the VIN cost of education tool, and then the institution's website. All right, so this is the AAVMC cost comparison tool. This is what it'll look like. If you look up this on Google, it'll show up for you. But essentially, it shows you all the vet schools in the area, and then you can click on any of these individual dots, which represent each school, and it'll give you information about the school. So for example, here's Washington State University. It'll give you the resident total tuition, and then so this is for all 4 years, or it'll give you the non-resident 4-year tuition, and then it also goes into the total cost. So that includes cost of living, books, car expenses, health insurance, all that. So that's what the total cost is on the bottom. And then it even goes into detail about whether or not you can establish residency. So what that means is that, say you apply to Washington and you're a California resident. For the first year, you would pay non-resident tuition. So that's a little higher than the resident, but after 1 year, you would start paying as if you're a resident. So your cost would go significantly down for the next 3 years. And then besides costs, it also goes into scholarship information, and we'll talk a little more about scholarships later. But it'll give you like a percentage of how many of the first year students get scholarships, the average amount, and then the total percentage of students overall, so through all 4 years, that get scholarships. And then it even goes a little bit into debt information for that specific school. And you can get their contact information as well. So it's a pretty cool tool. I suggest you all try it out. It's pretty fun. And other than that, there's another map that's put on by VIN, so that's the Veterinary Information Network. This one's a little different. You'll put in your state of residency. So for example, I would put in California, and then it actually it ranks all the schools based on how much it would cost you, based on cost of attendance. So based on this, if you're a California resident, the cheapest institution would be Virginia, Maryland. And the second cheapest would be, I believe this is like Tuskegee. Which is pretty nice. It even goes into the international schools too. So if you're interested in going to Australia or going to the UK, you can look at what the average cost is for students there. And then if you click on any individual school, so for example, I clicked on Tuskegee right here, that's number 2, it'll give you an average resident tuition, average non-resident tuition, average living expenses. So it's kind of nice because maybe the tuition's really cheap at that school, but if the cost of living in that city is huge, it's going to offset your cost of attendance. And then it even just goes into a few more details, and you can even see like the NAVLE pass rate and the average class size. So their class size is about 65, and 85% of their students pass their national board exams. But it's really cool. Really recommend this website. All right, and then the last place where you can look for cost of attendance is the school's website itself. They're all really transparent about what resident tuition is, what non-resident tuition is, and some of them even go into their scholarship policy. So if they might list scholarships that you can apply for, or they'll give you information about how they handle scholarships themselves as a school. So for example, this is the University of Arizona's website, and you can see that their cost of attendance is about $45,000 for resident tuition, and then at the bottom of this, if you scroll down, you can see non-resident tuition. Disclaimer, this one is a little higher than other schools for residents because it's a 3-year program, so instead of 4 years of paying this, you would be paying that for 3 years only. So it looks a little high, but depending on how long the program is, that also determines your total cost. And I think at the bottom, you can even find financial resources, um, and then scholarship information. So their website's great for that. All right. So going into student loans, since this is what the majority of people in vet school use to pay for their education. So there's currently 3 federal loans available for professional students. So as a veterinary student, you're not going to be considered a graduate student. You'd be considered a professional student, which is a little different. But the first option is the direct unsubsidized loan. It's pretty similar to what you get offered in undergrad from the federal government, but this one's specific for professional students. The interest rate changes every year for all these, so you have to check with the website, with the federal student aid website, but currently the interest rate is about 4.3%, and the interest accrues while you're in school. So unlike the subsidized loan, which a lot of people get in undergrad, you have to start paying, you start accumulating interest while you're in school. And that just means that essentially the loans you take out in your first year are going to be the ones that end up being more expensive because you've been accumulating interest for the longest time. That tends to be the first loan people tend to reach for because it has the lowest interest rate. But other than that, there is the direct grad plus loan. That interest rate is a little higher. It's 5.3%. And same thing as the unsubsidized loan, it accrues interest while you're in school. And both of these, you're going to have access to these. Usually what happens is you fill out your FAFSA, and then that you put in all your information. They'll send it to your school, and then the school that you're going to will give you your information about how much you can get from each loan, and then you'll let the school know how much you want to take out. And then the third option is the health profession student loan. This one's a little different. This is the only subsidized loan that is available for professional students. So that means interest is not going to accumulate while you're in school. And the interest rate is set at 5%. That doesn't really change. It's been the same for the past few years. But the caveat to this is usually you get offered less than you would get offered with the first 2 loans. And the amount just varies by university. So the people who determine how much each student can get from this loan is your financial aid office. So they're the ones in charge of letting you know when this is available to you, if it is, and then how much. And yeah, so for example, I think last year that health profession student loan, the max you could take out from that one was 7,000. And that I think is just based on how many students in your program are eligible for this loan. And you can find more information about these 3 types of loans on the federal student aid website. They have a lot of information about each of these. So I definitely recommend you check that out. Other than that, other than the federal student loans, there are also private lenders with whom you can obtain your student loans from. And these are going to be based on your credit score, and you have to find these on your own. So the federal student loans, typically your financial aid office will take care of this. They'll let you know how much you can get, and you just tell the financial aid office how much you're going to take, and they take care of everything and submit it into your student account. With private loans, you, like, for example, you'll go to the bank, you'll tell them how much you want, and you're in charge of doing all the paperwork and talking to the banker, and then they'll give you the money, and then you pay your student account. So it's a little different. And then besides, you obtaining it and the eligibility for this being different, repayment options are also going to be different than with federal student loans. With federal loans, there's repayment options like income-based that you can do, and sometimes you can't do those with private loans. So things to consider. Again, you can look into this. The federal student aid website also goes into these. And then you can even just look up federal loans versus private loans, vet school on Google. And there's a few, like VIN has a few articles about it. So does the AVMC, to give you more information about the difference between these 2 options. For scholarship options, going into that, this is another way of paying for your education. There are outside scholarships and then there's individual school scholarships. So scholarships, grants, and outside funding aren't guaranteed by the schools because they just vary per year. And since you don't have to pay them back, um, that's the difference between loans and this. You don't have to pay it back. And you will have to work to identify, apply, earn, and or receive all the funds to offset the cost of your education. So some scholarships that you apply for, similar to undergrad, they might give you a check and you have to submit that to the cashier's office, or they'll just put it in your bank account essentially, and then you pay your student account with that, or you pay your expenses um, from that. And so you can find these. A lot of the times you can find these online, so you can just look up scholarships. Organizations like the California Veterinary Association and the AVMC also sometimes list the scholarships that they know are available for students, and they'll give you the deadlines, and you just submit them. Other than that, there's also scholarships similar to how the UC has the UC scholarship application. A lot of vet schools have a scholarship application for their students, so you just fill one out. The school will look through all of the applications and decide based on your criteria who is eligible and who should receive each scholarship. Um, and usually, like for Davis, I think they have a pool of like 60 scholarships that they have available for students, and you just fill out that one common application. Um, and then besides that, there are some schools. So this is something to look into for each school. I didn't realize this was an option until I started at Davis. But some schools actually have a pool of funds that they can use to provide grants for their students. So Davis, for example, has a fund, and then they split that evenly depending on how much that is among all their students, and every student gets a certain amount of money as a grant to help offset their education. Um, so that you might not find out. They might not publish that information on their websites, but you'll find out once you start school with them. All right. Other scholarship applications besides, you just going online and finding them, are some of the career scholarships is what I like to call them. So the first one is the USDA Pathways Program. So these two programs that are listed down below provide DVM students with $15,000 a year towards their educational expenses, and then they get paid during school breaks. So the caveat to this is recipients are expected to work full time as a public health veterinarian for each school year that the student was covered by the scholarship. So basically, if you got the scholarship for 3 years while you were in school, so your second, third, and fourth year, you are committed to working for the USDA for 3 years after you graduate, um, where they need you. Um, and if you don't commit and you don't convert to that position, then you might need to pay that scholarship back. Um, but if this is of interest to you, this is more government regulatory work. It's not working as a small animal vet. Um, if you're interested, you can get more information. Just look up these two scholarship programs on Google, and usually the fact sheet pops up for each one, and they talk about eligibility a little more and what the job entails essentially. Okay. And the other kind of career scholarship is the Health Profession Scholarship Program with the US Army. So here, the Army will help you pay for your advanced medical degree, in this case, your veterinary degree, in exchange for going into active duty after completing your education. So this one's pretty cool. I think it's like the scholarship I've seen that pays the most, but you'll cover your full tuition up to 4 years. They'll pay for your books, equipment, and other fees. You also get a $2,400 or more monthly stipend to help offset your expenses, and then you might even get a signing bonus. If you're interested in this one, I suggest you contact an Army recruiter. You can also look up the scholarship online and they give you the recruiter information. HPA also hosts information sessions regarding the Health Profession Scholarship Program. I believe we do it at least once uh, a quarter, potentially. We just had one, I think, on April 5th, and the recruiter came to talk a little more in detail about the program and how to apply. All right. The other way that a lot of students use to pay off their usually their expenses, it's not usually their tuition, is most students have at least one part-time job while they're in vet school to offset some of their daily expenses. So some of the jobs that I've seen people do are they can be tutors, they can become veterinary assistants or technicians, especially in the summer. Um, there are some paid summer internship programs. So, for example, Banfield Veterinary Student Jobs, they have an application and you fill it out, they send you to a hospital. They have a lot of hospitals around the US, and then you just kind of intern there for the summer and you get paid while doing that. There are also student jobs at the veterinary hospitals. For example, I work as a pharmacy technician for the night shifts at the VMTH, which is the Veterinary Medical Teaching Hospital at Davis. It's pretty nice. I'm just there. I hand out medications to those who need it, but if nobody needs medications, I just do my homework. Um, and then there's many more options. A lot of students might not work while they're in school, but they'll use their summer breaks, or they might do a weekend here and there. Just depends on your comfort level and what you want to do. Um, the veterinary assistants and technicians is pretty nice because you get some experience while getting paid as well. All right. Okay. Before I go into debt, I think we have time. I can take a few questions before going into debt. Besides tuition, how much will it cost for books, learning tools, equipment, or outside learning, like going out on the field at UC Davis? Does UC Davis provide free information, resources for studying? So for cost of books and learning tools and equipment, things like that, it just depends on the school you go to. So for example, at least I only know really about Davis, but we usually don't like you can buy books if you want to, but most of the time, most of our exams are just based on lecture material. So they provide us a lot of information. But if you want to go into more detail, you can either buy the book or sometimes they have copies available in the library for us that we can either rent out or look at in the library, but they're not required. So I bought in one book, but that's just because I was interested in it and I know I'm going to use it in the future when I'm a veterinarian. But you don't have to buy anything, at least at Davis. You might need to buy, like, there's things like you might need a laptop. So Davis does a pretty good job. They offered us a $500 grant at the beginning of the year on our first year to help offset the cost of a new laptop if that was needed, just because we use our laptops a lot in school. We even take our exams there, even when we're in person. So they helped offset that cost, but that'll depend on your institution whether or not they require you to buy things and if they're gonna help you supplement that. And as for the free information resources, um, I mean, just if you're a UC Davis student, you have access to the VPN, and so you have access to a lot of like either textbooks or just in general like articles and things like that you need to study. Okay, I'm gonna move on just because we have 10 minutes to debt in the veterinary profession. So I'm not gonna go into too much detail about this. I wouldn't worry too much about this right now. This is more of something to worry about when you're in vet school and then when you're gonna start repaying your loans. But just so you guys are aware, here's some information about it. So median debt for 2019 DVM graduates, so those are the ones that just graduated 2 years ago, it was 173,451. So that's the median for the entire US. Most students take out some degree of student loans, but again, that's a range. Some might not take out any loans at all. Some might take out a lot more. So this is just the median. It's a good number just to be aware of what you might be seeing in the future. And then you'll learn more about your repayment options once it comes time to start your repayment period. So um, your lender usually will like you can talk to them when you're there. You can even talk to them before like your first year if you wanted to talk to them and ask them about it. You can do that as well. There's also seminars and workshops put on by people in the AVMC, or there's actually a few people whose job is they might be veterinarians, but they focus a lot on financing and helping people get out of debt. So you can always have access to those resources to learn a little more about it. But when it does come time to start your repayment period, make sure you fully understand all your options, and then that'll be your best bet for keeping your debt lower. And again, just oh, I forgot about this. Before I go into the chart, just to show you a little bit about the information, there is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. That's something sometimes people look into. I've been asked a few questions about this in the past, so I wanted to touch on it. Basically, what this is, if you work for certain nonprofit organizations or government organizations for 10 years, you can get your remaining federal loans forgiven. So this is only for federal loans. If you have private loans, that doesn't apply. And you have to make sure, like, if you're thinking about going into shelter medicine or into working for the government, um, things like that, those tend to be eligible for this. But I would, if you're interested in this, look into what organizations actually fall into this. And again, you can go to the federal student aid website and they explain the process of what all this is and what it entails. But again, you might not know what you want to do while you're in vet school. You'll find this out probably towards your third or fourth year when you really decide what you want to do. So I wouldn't worry too much about this right now. And just to touch on, veterinary medicine doesn't have that many jobs available compared to medical school, teaching, law, and all that. We don't have as many jobs that fall under these categories, but there are a few. Okay, and this is just a chart. You guys have access to this if you would like to see it. This is part of the public data that AVMC puts out. They have a lot of information about like demographics. So for example, if you're interested in seeing how diverse a certain school is, they have information about that on this. It's a really big document. This is just one of the charts I pulled from there to talk about the mean institutional indebtedness. So it has increased a little bit over the years, but it's been pretty stagnant. What has increased though is the number of students that have no debt. Not sure why that's a trend, but that might mean something good. It might also be just because students are becoming more aware of what their different options are and how to borrow better. Okay, so what can you do while you're an undergrad? Number one thing is budget and track your spending. If you know how much you're spending, like how much your rent is, how much your car expenses are, how much gas you use, an average of how much you spend at the grocery store, this can help you not only know where you might be able to cut back, but it also lets you know how much you need to borrow. So say you get to your first year and you're like, oh, I don't know how much money I need to borrow, and you just borrow the full amount they offer. They offer 60,000, you take $60,000. You might not need that much, and you end up just having this money that you need to pay interest for. So if you go into vet school knowing, okay, this is around how much I spend on groceries, this is how much I spend on rent, then you'll know, okay, I only need this certain amount of loans, and you'll take that out instead. Second thing is educate yourself about student loans. Look into what they are, what each entail. Look into which are your better options. You might have better interest rates if you have a really good credit score with a private lender versus with the federal government. Or for example, I'm thinking about going into government work. For me, the best thing is to get federal loans because I'm going to be working with the government. So I would be eligible for the public service forgiveness program. And if I have private loans, those aren't going to be forgiven. It's only the federal ones. So I try to stick to federal loans. And third is you can always ask institutions about the financial resources they provide to their students before deciding on a school. Like I said, some of them talk about it on their websites, some might not, but you can always reach out to them and ask them. There's nothing wrong with that. Awesome. And then just some financial resources for you guys. We've mentioned this one a lot, but the AVMC cost comparison tool, the VIN cost of attendance tool, the AVMC public data, just so like you can just see what the data is in vet schools, the federal student aid website, and then the institution's financial aid office. All right. And so we have like a few minutes for questions before we go into our personal statement. All right, I think. Do you have to pay all up front per quarter and semester like you did in undergrad? Will you get removed from your classes if not all is paid? So that's going to depend on the institution. Usually when you start vet school, there'll be like an advisor at the financial aid office for your school, and they'll come in and explain like how you can either, if they have options like deferred payment, kind of like UC Davis has, where you pay in increments of 3 months, or things like that, they'll be able to let you know. But yeah, that'll be dependent on each school. So Davis, like financial aid is very similar to how undergrad is. So that shouldn't be too different. But again, I can't speak for other institutions on that. I hope that answered your question. And for as if you get removed from your classes, I'm not sure, just because I've never met someone who has. It's a little different just because we don't really register for our courses. They kind of just register for us. So I'm not sure about that question. Do you know, Annabelle?
Oh, whoops.
Mhm.
was that the will you be removed if it's not all paid?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you would be on like a hold, and
yeah.
it would pretty much just like unenroll you from all classes. And in the block system, that's like one class. Um, so yeah, but that's just Davis. I don't know every school.
Yeah, that'll be dependent on each school. Um, and I think there's one, those are only for US citizens. What are you referring to exactly for that? Referring to the loans, I'm not sure. It's done through FAFSA, but I would recommend you look through the federal student aid website. They'll explain all the eligibility requirements there. And for scholarships, I believe at least like there are some scholarships that have that as a requirement to be a US citizen, but not all of them do. And then for the ones that your institution will do, that depends. I would just ask the school about that. But I believe that wasn't a requirement for the UC Davis vet school scholarships this
Yeah.
past year. Um, oh, and it looks like if you really want to, you could create your own nonprofit, and it could count for the public service loan forgiveness. Someone's brother did that for their loans. That's kind of smart. That might be an option too. Like if you're going to start your own nonprofit.
I've never heard that. I like it
Yeah,
though.
yeah,
Creative.
it's a good way of getting it. All right. So why don't we take a 2-minute break before we jump into the personal statement thing at like 2:31.